Hello, welcome to our channel. Here you will find the most useful and interesting audiobooks for free. Subscribe, press like, and the bell, so you don't miss new videos. Happy listening.
Introduction. Bad habits are our companions almost from the moment of birth until death. Some of them seem quite harmless at first glance. Well, really, what's wrong with biting your nails while worrying about an exam? Or eating an extra cake while sitting in front of the TV in the evening? Another thing is smoking, or excessive craving for alcohol. We all know the harm such addictions cause to the body. But, despite this, sometimes we are not able to refuse them, hoping deep down that nothing bad will happen to us. Let's try to figure out what really should be classified as bad habits, understand how they are formed, and most importantly, find out how to get rid of them. Chapter 1. Alcoholism. To drink or not to drink. But, in fact, is it really possible to imagine the new year without champagne, or a wedding without toasts to the health of the newlyweds? Almost no holiday is complete without alcohol. The birth of a long-awaited child, farewell to the army, anniversaries, alcohol flows like a river. Even ordinary meetings with friends or outings into nature cannot be imagined by many without a glass or two. Drinkers explain their addiction by the need to relieve stress after a hard day at work, loneliness, or simply refer to alcoholic customs that go back centuries. In fact, there are quite a lot of them. So, a fine for being late for a feast was supposed to be drunk back in ancient Rome. It just so happens in our country that the attitude towards drinkers is tinged with benevolent condescension. A person who has had too much the night before will not fail to tell his friends about his alcoholic adventures, and in most cases they will only laugh at such stories. Photos from alcohol parties will appear on social networks the next morning and get a lot of likes. On the eve of a football match, fans will be shown a beer advertisement on TV, which without exaggeration can be called creative. All this creates a positive perception of alcohol. In most other countries, attitudes towards alcohol are approximately the same, with the exception of those where its use is prohibited or limited by law. Alcohol is available everywhere. Green Serpent feels comfortable in supermarkets and wine boutiques, chic restaurants, pretentious nightclubs, and democratic cozy cafes. Look at the shelves of bookstores. There are almost more collections of recipes for moonshine or tips for getting rid of a hangover than there are manuals for combating alcohol addiction. Alcohol has become part of folklore, but all this is just a screen covering a really serious problem. On the way to understanding the problem, finding official alcohol statistics is not difficult. According to the World Health Organization, in 2023, USA ranked 35th in the world in per capita alcohol consumption, losing the dubious championship to Moldova, Uganda, the Czech Republic, and Hungary. For every resident over the age of 15, there were almost 16 liters of pure alcohol. Only 40-odd milliliters per day. You object? What a trifle. But don't forget. First, this is just an average, and many people drink alcohol in quantities much higher than this value. Secondly, even in small quantities, alcohol is a poison that has a detrimental effect on the body as a whole and on the brain in particular. This causes oxygen starvation. After a few years of even moderate alcohol consumption, tissues degenerate, neurons die, and the cerebral cortex shrinks. The result is loss of attentiveness and memory, decreased mental abilities, and, ultimately, complete intellectual degradation. Scientists have proven that one single glass of dry wine with dinner can disable a person's brain for 2 weeks. If you're used to relaxing like this every night after work, don't be surprised to discover after a while that you have difficulty coping with even the most simple professional duties. We will not list now the diseases that are caused by alcohol abuse. An impressive list of them can be found in any medical reference book or popular science article on this topic. Let us only note that knowledge about the dangers of alcohol for a few people became an obstacle to its use. The personality of a drinking person changes beyond recognition. At first, he thinks that alcohol will not cause any harm to him personally. Then bravado and overestimation of one's own capabilities appear. Remember how often you heard from friends, "I'll stop drinking as soon as I want, one more glass and that's it, life will get better, and not a bit more." Unfortunately, not everyone can cope with their addiction. And after a while, everything in a person's life is subordinated to one desire: to drink. Work, friends, hobbies, family. All the usual values are pushed into the background and gradually dissolve in the alcoholic fog. That is why alcoholism poses a danger not only to the person who suffers from it, but also to the people around him. Therefore, it can rightfully be called a socially dangerous disease. Careers that collapsed overnight, single-parent families, unhappy children left to their own devices, loss of housing. This is a very likely outcome of a journey that began with a cheerful feast. It's not a beer that kills people. Fans of the foamy barley drink and defend its harmlessness to the body, and they will never agree to admit that they are alcoholics. Their arguments are simple and at first glance quite logical. But what is the actual situation? Let's try to figure it out. Beer does not have a high alcohol content, therefore, unlike vodka, moonshine, and other strong drinks, it is practically harmless. Yes, beer is a low-alcohol drink, but this does not mean that it is healthy. Even light beers contain enough ethanol to cause a number of chronic diseases if consumed systematically. Think about it. A bottle of medium-strength beer is equivalent to a glass of vodka, and it turns out that, having whiled away the evening with this drink, you unnoticeably drink up to half a liter of strong alcohol in terms of alcohol. Imagine that there are several such evenings a week. Beer alcoholism does not exist. Indeed, official medicine does not operate with this concept and does not distinguish between someone who has become an alcoholic by drinking denigrate and someone who, culturally, in his own opinion, drinks a couple of glasses of beer a day. Nevertheless, it has long been proven that beer causes psychological and physiological addiction much faster than strong alcoholic drinks, and a person can become an alcoholic without even noticing to himself or others. This happens due to the fact that our consciousness simply does not see the danger in its consumption, since traditionally it is considered a light, relaxing drink. You cannot drink so much beer at once as to cause irreparable damage to your body. Yes, cases of severe alcohol intoxication, often leading to death, are more likely with the abuse of strong, and especially low-quality, alcoholic beverages. However, systematic consumption of beer is nothing more than systematic poisoning of the body with small portions of alcohol. In addition to the usual diseases that accompany alcoholism, beer abuse contributes to the development of very specific ailments. You've probably heard the term beer heart. Scientists have found that the carbon dioxide contained in beer leads to varicose veins and makes the heart muscle flabby. And cobalt, used as a stabilizer, can cause dilation of the heart cavities and muscle necrosis. After analyzing the chemical composition of beer, you can find many harmful substances in it. Take, for example, phytoestrogens are an analog of female sex hormones, and therefore excessive consumption of beer will sooner or later lead to hormonal imbalance. Men who love beer may not recognize themselves in the mirror in a few years. Their figure will become effeminate since phytoestrogens provoke fat deposition in the breasts and hips. And the worst thing is that hormonal changes manifest themselves not only externally. Over time, attraction to the opposite sex inevitably decreases. Well, in conclusion, a little about the moral aspect of beer consumption. For some reason, it is generally accepted that this is the most suitable drink for a friendly company. You can drink it anywhere and with anyone. Look, beer lovers say, entire festivals are held in honor of it. As a result, we calmly pass by young mothers pushing a stroller with one hand and holding a steamy bottle of their favorite drink in the other. Conclusion: bad habits such as alcohol abuse, including beer, are a serious problem. It is important to realize that even seemingly harmless drinks can cause irreparable harm to the body if consumed regularly. It is necessary to cultivate a healthy lifestyle and develop critical thinking so as not to succumb to marketing gimmicks and social stereotypes. Take care of your health and the health of your loved ones. We are not shocked by the flocks of teenagers sitting in the gateway drinking the same beer. Such tolerance ultimately leads to a change in attitude towards drinking any alcoholic beverages. As a result, an increase in the percentage of people suffering from alcoholism. Alcoholism is getting younger every year. This terrible diagnosis, even for an adult, is increasingly being made to adolescents and children. According to official statistics, the first acquaintance with alcohol occurs at the age of 12 to 13 years. Every third high school student, and every fifth high school girl regularly drink beer and other low-alcohol drinks. By the end of school, more than half of the students manage to taste and evaluate the taste of vodka, whiskey, and cognac. The reasons for this phenomenon have been studied quite well and are quite commonplace. The main thing is the availability of alcohol. It is possible that conscientious sellers will refuse to sell a bottle of vodka if they doubt the buyer's age. But they are unlikely to see anything scary in a guy or girl taking a can of low-alcohol cocktail from the shelf. Meanwhile, such drinks become addictive very quickly due to their specific chemical composition. The taste and unpleasant smell of inexpensive alcohol are successfully clogged with flavorings and sweeteners. Carbon dioxide promotes the rapid absorption of alcohol into the blood and, accordingly, almost immediate intoxication. If a teenager's first acquaintance with alcohol begins with a low-alcohol cocktail, the likelihood of developing alcoholism is very high. The so-called energy tonics, which young people have recently preferred to use not only in clubs and parties, but also during breaks between lectures or lessons, also cause no less harm. Manufacturers position these drinks as increasing physical endurance and mental performance. True, they forget to mention that the high caffeine content in such products leads to addiction, and systematic artificial stimulation of the body leads to nervous exhaustion. Recent research has found a link between increased alcohol consumption among young people and energy drinks. As it turns out, many people like the effect of intoxication and vigor at the same time. As a result, more of both drinks are drunk together than separately. Sobriety school. If gloomy depression is constantly replaced by unnatural euphoria, the morning after a friendly party it is impossible to remember what you laughed at. A sip of cold beer is considered the best remedy for a headache. Appetite decreases and performance deteriorates. Alas, these are sure signs that a tender friendship with alcohol has developed into chronic addiction. Of course, it is easier to prevent such a development of events than to subsequently try to overcome a terrible habit. It sounds scary, but it's a fact. In most cases, children take their first sip of alcohol in the company of adults. Moreover, often these are not evil, strangers, but their own parents. The desire to appear more mature in the eyes of peers encourages adolescents who grew up in prosperous families to drink alcohol. And they're successful. From the point of view of society, mothers and fathers at the same time drown their problems in alcohol, seeing no other way to get rid of stress. Prevention of alcoholism. Personal responsibility and the role of society. You can say that preventing alcoholism is a matter for the state, society, or, say, a school. Alas, this is not entirely true. The struggle for a sober lifestyle must begin within a person. After all, it depends only on his desire whether he will be able to resist his addiction. Family cohesion. Interesting hobbies. Friends with whom you share common interests. This is what will help you never look in the direction of the glass. Dealing with alcoholism alone is incredibly difficult. But the very fact of admitting that you have this habit is already great courage and a step in the right direction. There are many ways to overcome addiction to alcohol: detoxification clinics, general health programs, psychological training, and folk remedies in the end. The main thing is not to stop believing in yourself, strive for a healthy lifestyle, and not push away loved ones who sincerely want to help.
Please, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you.
Chapter 2. Drug addiction. From berserkers to nightclubs. Perhaps everyone knows about the existence of drugs, as well as about the problems that drug addiction causes both to the drug addict himself and to society as a whole. According to official data, illegal global drug trafficking annually reaches $500 billion and brings drug cartels income comparable to that of the oil and gas industry. The number of people who use certain drugs exceeds 3% of the total population of the earth, which is more than 200 million. There are more than 980,000 drug addicts in USA, but these are only those who are registered. In fact, according to experts, there are currently almost 6 million of them. Every year, tens of thousands of people die from drug overdoses and diseases associated with drug addiction. Every day, more and more children are born to drug-addicted parents with developmental pathologies. According to statistics provided by law enforcement agencies, the number of drug-related crimes is steadily increasing. So, The problem of drug addiction exists. But how did it happen that it acquired such a terrifying scale? Why are drugs, as literally everyone knows today, the extraordinary properties of some plants and mushrooms were revealed to humanity a long time ago? Archaeological finds indicate that even the Sumerians, 5000 BC, were well aware of the methods of obtaining opium. In the medicinal treatises of the ancient Romans, this substance was described as a panacea for a number of diseases. And Chinese sages many centuries ago recommended hashish as an effective means for activating mental activity. The therapeutic effect of narcotic drugs is recognized and used by official medicine. But, unfortunately, the popularity of drugs was facilitated by their completely different capabilities. It was the hallucinogenic and psychotropic properties that attracted people. Berserkers, according to legends, used fly agaric tinctures before the battle to put themselves into a fighting frenzy and become invincible warriors. Shamans used the juice of some wild plants to achieve a state of altered consciousness and gain the ability to speak with spirits or threw narcotic herbs into the fire during a ritual, after which they easily put not only themselves but also members of the tribe into a trance. History and distribution of drugs. South American Indians chewed the pulp of certain types of cacti during religious ceremonies, which helped them experience mystical experiences. People did not immediately understand that drugs cause addiction, lead to irreversible changes in the psyche, and negatively affect the functions of various organs. This was one of the reasons that drugs of this kind were not only not prohibited, but were also promoted in every possible way. Drugs began to be used not only for medical purposes as an effective pain reliever. This, by the way, led to the fact that many participants in the hostilities returned home as morphine addicts and cocaine addicts. They have become widespread in creative circles. The famous French poet Charles Baudelaire drew inspiration from opium and hashish. Towards the end of his days, he realized the detrimental effects drugs had on his body and mind. I tried to tell my fans about this, but I couldn't defeat the drug demon myself. The specific properties of absinthe infused with wormwood caused addiction to Victor Hugo and Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec. And the fashion for this bohemian drug drink quickly spread throughout France. Doctors began to sound the alarm, but, alas, representatives of criminal circles became interested in drugs and quickly realized how easy it was to make fabulous profits from their trade. Prohibition contributed to the spread of drug addiction among the general population in a number of European countries. Alcohol has become less accessible, but the habit of clouding the mind and thus running away from problems remains. Here the drug dealers with their dubious services were in the right place at the right time. The official prohibition of drugs for some time helped to stop their further spread, and in the first half of the 20th century, drug addiction began to be seen as part of the criminal world. However, fashionable experiments with artificial expansion of consciousness soon returned, and the chemistry did not stand still. A number of potent psychotropic substances were synthesized, and drugs again took up the positions they had left behind. Some musicians, youth idols, unwittingly contributed to the propaganda of drugs. Their use began to be seen as a unique form of social protest. Decent managers and housewives also did not refuse to smoke a cigarette with marijuana on occasion, and people from wealthy circles allowed themselves to experiment with more expensive and potent drugs. In Europe and the United States, the wave of drug use subsided somewhat when it became known that drug use was associated with an increased risk of contracting AIDS. And a few years later, the fashion for a healthy lifestyle came, in which there was no place for drugs. On the one hand, synthetic drugs have become an attribute of a glamorous life, and their trade flourishes in clubs for gilded youth. On the other hand, more and more teenagers from low-income communities are becoming drug addicts. Let's try to figure out why and how this happens. I'll just try. It is with these words that drug addiction most often begins. In recent years, the desire to experience unusual sensations has arisen in an increasing number of teenagers. At first, it may be simple curiosity or an attempt to fit in with friends who have already tried drugs. Teenagers tend to seek new experiences, and drugs seem like an easy way to get a great experience. However, this first try often leads to addiction that destroys lives. The problem is that teenagers often underestimate the risk. They may think that they will try it just once and not become addicted. But drugs have powerful effects on the brain, especially in young people whose nervous systems are still developing. This makes them more vulnerable to developing an addiction. There are also social factors. In conditions of poverty and social instability, drugs can seem like a way to forget and escape reality. Unemployment, family problems, lack of prospects, all this contributes to the fact that teenagers begin to seek solace in drugs. Prevention and fight against drug addiction. Drug addiction prevention must begin with the family. Parents should be aware of who their children are hanging out with and try to create an atmosphere at home where children feel safe and can talk openly about their problems. Schools and community organizations also play an important role. Schools should run programs to educate teenagers about the dangers of drugs and how to resist peer pressure. Community organizations can help families at risk of drug addiction and support those who are already facing this problem. Problems of drug addiction among young people. According to statistics, young people aged 16 to 30 make up 60% of the total number of drug addicts in the United States, and teenagers make up 20%. On average, exposure to drugs occurs at the age of 15 to 17 years. Several factors contribute to this. Firstly, the teenager feels quite independent, and the opinions of parents and teachers are not taken into account. The desire for freedom comes to the fore. Secondly, despite their apparent independence, at this age, teenagers are most susceptible to external influence. It is incredibly difficult to refuse an offer to try a drug. On the one hand, out of curiosity, on the other, out of fear of showing your weakness in front of friends and even casual acquaintances. This is skillfully used by drug dealers, who are often good psychologists. There is such a thing as club drugs. Among young people, they are considered an integral part of club culture. Most teenagers do not see anything terrible in them, since they are not associated with the image of a drug addict who is on a needle and has lost his human appearance. On the contrary, such drugs are presented as a magical remedy that will help you relax and become sociable, witty, and tireless. The sad result, according to statistics, it is in nightclubs and similar establishments that 70% of teenagers try drugs for the first time. Thirdly, many myths about drugs are widespread among young people, and teenagers tend to believe more than the facts. Among the most dangerous misconceptions, once or twice you don't get addicted. Soft drugs are practically harmless. You can quit at any time without any problems. You can take drugs from time to time and not experience health problems. Whether trying illegal drugs out of curiosity, for company, or out of a sense of protest, not a single teenager believes that he is doing this in order to become a drug addict. Such prospects seem unrealistic and so distant that they are simply not taken into account. Myths and reality. Meanwhile, doctors never tire of repeating that soft drugs are only the beginning of the journey. According to statistics, 90% of complete drug addicts started with marijuana. Addiction to some modern drugs occurs almost instantly, after 1 or 2 doses, and it is almost impossible to refuse them without the help of specialists. Drugs are not a step to freedom, as many people think, and not a salvation from everyday misfortunes. Psychological and physiological dependence on hallucinogenic and psychotropic drugs develops rapidly. It is easy to fall into a trap, but it is almost impossible to get out of it alone. Consequences of drug use. Drugs have one scary feature. At first, the person taking them feels omnipotent. Great mood, frantic performance, creative enthusiasm, liberation in sex, and many other pleasant little things. This is precisely why narcotic drugs are used at first. But the time inevitably comes when irreversible changes occur in the psyche, and the body physiologically cannot withstand a single day without a new dose. A person goes to any lengths to get the drug. Moral values are relegated to the background. Deception, self-trafficking, theft, murder. All this becomes commonplace for the sake of a new dose. Prevention and fight against drug addiction. Drug addiction prevention must begin with the family. Parents should be aware of who their children are hanging out with and try to create an atmosphere at home where children feel safe and can talk openly about their problems. Schools and community organizations also play an important role. Schools should run programs to educate teenagers about the dangers of drugs and how to resist peer pressure. Community organizations can help families at risk of drug addiction and support those who are already facing this problem. Finally, The state must take active measures to combat drug trafficking and support rehabilitation programs for drug addicts. After all, drug addiction is a problem that concerns not only the drug addict himself, but also the entire society as a whole. From the point of view of a drug addict, ways to get the desired potion become completely acceptable. No one can even imagine in their wildest dreams that a loved one could become a drug addict. But, unfortunately, such a danger awaits almost everyone. It is extremely important not to miss the moment and notice it in time. Experts believe that several specific signs may indicate a problem with drugs. For example, showing indifference to previously familiar responsibilities, indifferent attitude to school in adolescence and to work in adults, apathy, frequent and sudden changes in mood. An unexpected change in the rhythm of daily activity should also cause anxiety. People who start taking drugs often feel drowsy and lethargic in the morning, but in the evening they are, on the contrary, overly alert. Poor appetite followed by gluttony, and a previously unobserved craving for sweets, unnatural pallor, thinness, or sudden weight gain. Changed pupils and slow and unclear speech are also signs that a person is addicted to drugs. A change in social circle may also indicate bad habits. Moreover, new acquaintances who avoid contact with other members of your family should be of particular concern. Disappearance of valuables from the home. Constant requests to borrow money. This, unfortunately, is confirmation that your friend or family member has become a drug addict. Whatever the addict promises you, no matter how much he vows to stop, all of this, with rare exceptions, is an attempt to deceive and delay the start of treatment. Drugs bind a person more tightly than any chains. A monstrous combination of psychological and physiological dependence, changing consciousness and attitude towards life. The fear of physical suffering when quitting medications, the so-called withdrawal, all prevents you from returning to your previous, healthy life. If the worst thing has happened and you want to help a person cope with an illness, remember that it is impossible to do this without the help of specialists. Be persistent. Don't give in to feelings of pity. Don't follow the lead of a drug addict. Only decisive actions together with narcologists and psychologists will defeat the disease. Do we need coffee shops? At the end of our conversation about drug addiction, I would like to say a few words about its prevention, or rather about the bizarre forms that it sometimes takes. Recently, calls for the legalization of so-called soft drugs have been increasingly heard. Supporters of this measure argue that the fight against drug cartels is ineffective. Any legislative prohibitions only lead to the fact that the methods of criminal organizations become more and more sophisticated. The number of drug addicts not only is not decreasing but, on the contrary, is growing every year. As a way out of this situation, it is proposed to allow the legal sale and use of soft drugs. It is believed that this, firstly, will reduce the volume of illegal drug trafficking and reduce the number of crimes, and secondly, it will prevent the trafficking of hard drugs. The Global Commission on Drug Policy, which includes authoritative experts, former and current UN representatives, calls for such actions, no less. The experience of those countries where marijuana is legal is given as an example. For example, Holland. As you know, there it, like some types of hallucinogenic mushrooms, can be bought without problems in specialized establishments called coffee shops. Perhaps the only advantage of this practice is the flow of tourists who come to the country every year to enjoy the opportunity to join the drug culture with impunity. Doctors warn that marijuana use is not as harmless as is commonly believed. Dependence on this drug develops very slowly and almost imperceptibly. Over time, the desire to experiment with other drugs inevitably arises. And as a result, more than 60% of marijuana users turn to hard drugs. Chapter 3. Tobacco smoking, fashion or addiction. Tobacco smoking is one of the most common bad habits. It seems less dangerous than alcohol addiction or, especially, to drugs. This may be why so many people are addicted to tobacco. According to statistics, there are more than 1.1 billion smokers in the world. Among them, there are both men and women, as well as teenagers and the elderly. In the US, 28% of men and 24% of women smoke daily, while in England the figure is 30% among men and 28% among women. Smoking usually begins during adolescence, when cigarettes are considered part of adulthood. For boys, The image of a smoker seems brutal, since most of the men around them smoke, while girls believe that a cigarette in their hand makes them look like stars walking on the catwalk or socialites. In addition, some believe that smoking helps to cope with excess weight, which is in fashion today. The first experience of smoking usually does not bring much pleasure due to bitterness in the mouth, unpleasant odor, and dizziness. It seems that this is enough to forget about smoking forever. However, a few days later, in the company of friends, the teenager is simply uncomfortable refusing the offered cigarette, as he is afraid of seeming awkward. Gradually, the number of cigarettes smoked increases, and a person can no longer imagine his life without them. Where did the fashion for smoking come from? Tobacco has been known to mankind for a long time. In America, it began to be grown several centuries BC. The Indians attributed special properties to this plant. It is no coincidence that when peace was concluded between the tribes, the peace pipe was ceremoniously smoked. In Europe, tobacco was introduced only in the middle of the 15th century. Christopher Columbus is usually blamed for the spread of this habit throughout the world, although the great explorer himself did not smoke. However, one of the members of his expedition became addicted to smoking tobacco, for which he paid with his head. The Spanish Inquisition decided that tobacco smoke was not only a manifestation of illness, but also the machinations of the devil, and sentenced the unfortunate smoker to death. In France, tobacco has had better luck. He became popular at the royal court. Catherine de' Medici snorted tobacco leaf powder to relieve migraines. Court doctors wrote treatises on the healing properties of this plant. According to Catherine de' Medici, most likely, she was the first to figure out how to benefit from the bad habits of her subjects. When tobacco addiction became widespread, the Queen gave several merchants monopoly rights to sell it in exchange for hefty contributions to the treasury. Today, excise taxes on cigarettes make up a significant portion of budget revenues in various countries. Thus, in the European Union in 2023, they brought in 17 billion euros. Ironically, doctors have contributed to the rise in popularity of tobacco in many countries. Those people who are now actively fighting this habit. For a long time, they mistakenly believed that the plant had healing properties and actively promoted smoking. By the time it became clear that tobacco was harmful, the habit was already in the hands of too many people to be easily overcome. In addition, cigar and cigarette manufacturers appreciated the amount of income they brought in and also actively promoted smoking. Cigarettes for women, cigarettes with reduced nicotine and tar content were invented, which ultimately led to an increase in the number of smokers. The Ministry of Health warns that smoking causes terrible harm to the human body. By the way, many smokers themselves do not deny this, but do not fully understand the seriousness of the disaster. They are not even stopped by the fact that more than 5 million people die every year from diseases caused by smoking. Tobacco smoke contains about 4,000 harmful substances. The most toxic of them include nicotine, tar, and a number of poisonous gases. Nicotine is a substance that causes addiction to tobacco. It is able to almost instantly enter the circulatory system through the mucous membrane of the mouth and lungs, primarily causing an invigorating effect, relieving nervous tension, and improving mood. However, the negative effects of nicotine are much stronger. It increases the heart rate, causes changes in pulse, and constricts blood vessels. With prolonged exposure to nicotine in the body, blood pressure increases and muscle weakness occurs. In its pure form, nicotine is a strong poison that causes paralysis of the nervous system, respiratory arrest, and cessation of cardiac activity. Doctors say that the lethal dose of nicotine for an adult is 1 milligram per kilogram of weight. That is, death can occur if you smoke a pack of cigarettes one after another. Tars are formed when tobacco is burned. They are carcinogens, that is, they contribute to the development of cancerous tumors. According to statistics, the majority of patients with lung and larynx cancer are experienced smokers. Don't fool yourself into thinking that safe cigarettes exist. No filter or mouthpiece can 100% prevent tar from entering the body. In addition to tobacco smoke, smokers inhale carbon monoxide, which binds to hemoglobin in the blood and causes oxygen starvation. Other dangerous components are carbon monoxide, which damages the walls of blood vessels, and hydrogen cyanide, which destroys the cilia of the lungs. Cancer. This is far from the only disease that can be caused by smoking. This bad habit has a devastating effect on the immune system as a whole. Smoking increases the risk of stroke and myocardial infarction and increases blood cholesterol levels, leads to the development of gastric ulcers, harmful effect on the condition of blood vessels, destroys the nervous system, and is one of the causes of impotence. The connection between nicotine and alcohol addiction has been proven. In smokers, addiction to alcoholic beverages develops much faster and is more persistent than in those who have never picked up a cigarette. Smoking is especially harmful to the female body. The harmful substances contained in tobacco smoke make the skin and hair dull. It causes premature aging of the skin and contributes to the appearance of early wrinkles. It would seem that the mere desire to preserve youth and beauty should stop a woman's hand reaching for a cigarette. Smoking has an extremely negative effect on pregnancy. This bad habit leads to abortion and premature birth, and increases the risk of intrauterine fetal death. There is a high probability of having children with physical deformities and nervous system disorders. Children whose mothers smoke during pregnancy are underweight, sleep poorly, and are more susceptible to infectious diseases. They often lag behind their peers in mental development. Passive smoking is no less dangerous, especially for children. That is why, in recent years, bans on smoking in public places have become much stricter, even though this does not prevent heavy smokers from continuing to poison their loved ones with tobacco smoke. How to quit smoking easy. One cannot but rejoice at the fact that in recent years the fight against smoking has been quite active. Increasing prices for cigarettes, administrative restrictions for smokers, and social advertising are slowly but surely producing positive results. Smoking is no longer fashionable or modern. If you decide to get rid of this bad habit and join the ranks of supporters of a healthy lifestyle, you may find the most effective ways to quit smoking interesting. Behavioral therapy. According to statistics, about 90% of smokers try to quit tobacco on their own, realizing the harm this bad habit causes to their health. Unfortunately, the physical and psychological dependence on nicotine is so strong that after 3 months, 70% of those who quit smoking start again. Behavioral therapy can help cope with temptations. Its essence is that the patient, under the guidance of specialists, learns self-control. He is asked to identify the reasons that prompt him to quit smoking, as well as to outline the circle of so-called incentives that encourage smoking to try to eliminate them from his life. It's no secret that for many people the process of smoking is a kind of ritual. If the desire to smoke arises after a morning cup of coffee, go outside, meet work colleagues, and so on, it is important to try to abandon such associations. Behavioral therapy methods are precisely aimed at breaking stable psychological connections between smoking and other everyday activities. Aversion therapy. The essence of this method is that the patient is instilled with a negative attitude towards smoking. The smell and taste of tobacco smoke and the very thought of cigarettes after treatment begin to cause physical disgust. The heart rate increases, nausea, chills or fever, a feeling of fear, and the like appear. Nicotine replacement therapy. This method is used when the physiological dependence on nicotine is so great that quitting smoking causes severe discomfort, and sometimes a condition similar to drug withdrawal. To reduce withdrawal symptoms, a certain level of nicotine is maintained in the patient's blood for 10 to 15 days. Then the intake of nicotine-containing drugs is gradually reduced to nothing. Chantix. Recently, the use of this drug has been considered an effective method in the fight against smoking. The active ingredient of the drug varenicline not only reduces the craving for smoking and withdrawal symptoms, but also reduces the effect of pleasure from smoking. Millimeter therapy. This method is a type of reflexology. As you know, there are certain points of influence on the human body that affect the functioning of the organs and systems of the body. It is used in both non-traditional and official medicine. Millimeter therapy is based on the impact on biologically active points with high-frequency pulsed current with a short wavelength. There are several dozen more effective ways to quit smoking, so you can easily choose the one that suits you. The main thing is the desire to take a conscious step towards a healthy and long life. Electronic cigarettes. Real help or advertising gimmick? Some time ago, electronic cigarettes appeared on sale. Their manufacturers are conducting an active advertising campaign, claiming that, unlike regular cigarettes, electronic cigarettes do not cause any harm to either the smoker himself or others. From a technical point of view, Electronic cigarettes are an inhaler into which a cartridge of smoking liquid is inserted. The latter may contain nicotine in a certain concentration or be completely without it. It is believed that electronic cigarettes allow you to completely imitate the smoking process, but do not affect the body with harmful substances contained in tobacco smoke. Doctors have not yet come to a clear conclusion about their benefits and harms, since no special studies have been conducted on this issue. However, there is an opinion that sooner or later a person who switches to electronic cigarettes will return to traditional smoking methods. E-cigarettes do not completely cure addiction. They are just a more modern way of delivering nicotine into the body. It may make sense to use them for a short time as a nicotine replacement therapy tool. In any case, it is undeniable that smoking electronic cigarettes is less dangerous to health than smoking traditional tobacco products. Chapter 4. Internet and TV addiction. By switching channels, we all fall into the trap of TV addiction. Disputes about the benefits and harms of scientific and technological progress have not subsided for many years. Let's leave aside the global problems associated with the development of scientific and technical thought, and let's talk about what bad habits they can cause. Millions of people come home from work in the evening, and the first thing they do is turn on their TVs to find out about the latest events in the country and the world, or simply relax while watching their favorite TV series or show. On the one hand, this is very convenient because you can do household chores at the same time. On the other hand, watching TV can become a really bad habit. The addiction to television is sometimes so strong that a person is ready to sit for hours in front of the screen, mindlessly switching channels, even realizing that he will not find anything interesting for himself. TV addiction, according to numerous scientific studies, causes real harm to health. Previously, doctors warned against spending too long in front of a screen, citing mainly damage to vision. Modern TVs pose less of a hazard to eyesight, but another problem has emerged. The number of channels and programs is so great that it becomes impossible to tear yourself away from the TV, which leads to physical inactivity. A decrease in physical activity leads to the development of a number of serious diseases, including obesity, metabolic disorders, and problems with the heart and blood vessels. Every extra hour of TV viewing increases the risk of cardiovascular disease by 11%. Children who spend a lot of time watching TV suffer not only from physical illnesses, but also from neuropsychic disorders such as insomnia and irritability. However, adults can also suffer from this habit, often abandoning outdoor activities in favor of watching TV. Television can also lead to zombie-like behavior, robbing people of their ability to think for themselves and make decisions. Internet addiction. Internet addiction, or painful dependence on the internet, is a relatively new and harmful habit. Despite the real harm it brings to a person, official medicine does not recognize it as a mental disorder, and some experts even deny its existence. The internet provides access to a huge amount of information, and for many users, it becomes a source of knowledge and communication. However, internet surfing often becomes a way of escaping reality, and this can be almost as dangerous as addiction to alcohol or drugs. Psychologists say that any addictive behavior has destructive effects on a person. A person who spends a lot of time on the internet begins to distort reality and feels safer in the virtual world. He may experience psychological discomfort and anxiety if he loses access to the internet. Internet addiction can lead to serious changes in a person's personality, pushing study, work, friends, and family into the background. Physical manifestations of addiction may include dry eyes, back pain, carpal tunnel syndrome, and insomnia. Like any other addiction, internet addiction can develop very quickly. Getting rid of it can be difficult, but it is possible. Professional help, support from loved ones, and lifestyle changes can be effective methods of combating this bad habit. Of course, it exists, and it's also quite simple. Any interesting activity in the real world. New acquaintances and hobbies will help you cope with your bad habits. And then the internet will simply become a convenient modern tool for work, self-education, and communication. About the benefits and harms of social networks. Social networks were originally conceived as a tool for virtual communication, a place where one could find old friends or make new ones, unite in interest groups, and share interesting stories. However, by registering on one or another social network, You can not only become a prisoner of internet addiction, but also get yourself into serious problems. The first of them is the replacement of a real image with a virtual one. Behind the screen, it's easy to appear much better to your interlocutor than you really are. A photo processed in a graphic editor on the main page, a clever quote as a status, several posts, and now Cinderella has already turned into a virtual princess. A shy teenager turns into a real hero. Taking off your virtual mask is not easy. Such a game can continue for years, ultimately causing distortion of self-esteem, rejection of reality, and other psychological problems. The second danger of social networks, according to experts, is that they are used to search for romantic acquaintances. An innocent conversation easily develops into mutual interest, flirting, or a serious relationship. Such connections may never go beyond the virtual world, but at the same time, with 100% probability, they will harm family relationships. Not one of the spouses will like the fact that his other half spends hours on the internet, pleasantly communicating with a stranger, neglecting family values. Another danger of social networks is the disclosure of personal information left by users. They often do not realize that after studying photos and comments on them, it is difficult to get a complete impression of their financial situation, lifestyle, and much more. And scammers, marriage swindlers, and collection agencies can take advantage of this. Yes, if you owe a large sum, avoid social networks so as not to come to the attention of current and potential employers. Recently, psychologists have been sounding the alarm. Even children and teenagers spend more and more time on social networks, preferring to communicate with peers there instead of going for a walk or playing outdoor games. This leads to hyperdynamism and problems with socialization. The fight against this habit should be carried out in the same way as with internet addiction. It must be remembered that no social network can replace live human communication. Chapter 5. Gambling Addiction. How does passion turn into illness? The history of gambling goes back several thousand years. Dice was played in ancient Egypt and ancient Greece. Moreover, if you believe the myths and legends, even the gods whom the Egyptians and Greeks believed in did not disdain this game. Playing cards are believed to have originated in the 12th century in China. Gambling? In the 3rd millennium BC, the psychology of passion has not been fully studied. Experts still cannot give a clear answer to the question of what motivates a person who makes money bets or places bets in a casino. This is far from a thirst for easy money, as it might seem at first glance, although, of course, it motivates the player. A gambler views his winnings as proof of his own importance, superiority over other, less fortunate players, and even over fate itself. Winning a game of chance causes a feeling of euphoria, and the process itself brings indescribable pleasure. Gambling people have existed at all times. Among them were many successful individuals who realized themselves in business, politics, and creativity. John Monty, Guy and Michel de Montaigne, René Descartes, Casanova, all of whom are also known as gamblers. A morbid addiction to gambling jeopardizes a person's personal life and career. It forces you to plunge into a hole of debt and sometimes even leads to suicide. Despite the long history of gambling, the term gambling mania or gambling itself is relatively new. Psychologists began to think seriously about the risks and dangers of gambling addiction only in the 60s of the 20th century. At the same time, they began to discuss that painful addiction poses a danger not only to the player himself but also to his loved ones, as well as to society as a whole. Sooner or later, gamblers begin to experience financial problems. This leads not only to the destruction of family and career, but also to involvement in crime. According to statistics, about 60% of gambling addicts commit offenses of varying severity. Gambling also causes considerable harm to the psyche. Constant tension and disappointment from losing can cause depression and sometimes the desire to commit suicide. Up to 40% of gambling addicts attempt suicide. How to recognize a gambling addict? Gambling addiction is not just a bad habit, it is a socially dangerous disease. The desire to have a little fun and try your luck can quietly turn into a destructive addiction to gambling, causing harm to both the player himself and his environment. Sometimes the passion for the game goes so far that only qualified psychological help can help. It is important to remember that the sooner the fight against this disease begins, the more successful it will be. How to recognize an avid gamer? Psychologists warn that you should pay attention to the following signs. If a person spends more and more time gambling, giving it preference over other types of entertainment. If the topic of gaming constantly creeps into his conversations, wins, losses, and various strategies for gaming behavior are discussed. If between playing sessions he experiences psychological discomfort, becomes overly irritated, or, conversely, lethargic and depressed. If the player is unable to control his habit, he constantly promises himself to stop but continues to play at every opportunity. If you're prone to excitement, think about it. Don't you notice that you can't stop either at the moment of losing or at the moment of winning? If all your thoughts revolve around past and expected game situations? If you are ready to play for your last penny, and the next day there is no fear of going into debt in the hope of winning back? Oh, all this indicates that you are suffering from gambling addiction. Is it possible to defeat a one-armed bandit? Casinos are open in almost all major cities. Slot machines are located in shopping centers, supermarkets, and even on the streets. Not everyone manages to pass by and not try their luck. There are stories among players about fantastic winnings and super strategies that guarantee success. You can argue that casinos have been operating in many countries for a long time, and this does not harm their residents. However, do not forget that in the West, casinos are allowed only in certain gambling zones. Outside these zones, a person with a gambling addiction has virtually no chance of satisfying his bad habit. In Las Vegas, too, casinos are huge entertainment centers where you can not only gamble but also enjoy performances by famous artists. Therefore, there you can meet not only rich people making fabulous bets at the roulette or card tables, but also ordinary pensioners who enjoy playing slot machines and are happy about even a small win. In small halls filled with crowds of people and tobacco smoke, players spend hours trying to hit the jackpot. Not everyone succeeds, and even those who win often return to try again. In the big casinos of the world, there will be no clocks, and the windows will be covered with curtains. This trick allows owners to keep players for as long as possible, making them forget about time and keep them in the casino. Also, free cocktails are not a gift from the establishment, but another way to stimulate the game, because alcohol can cause a feeling of intoxication and self-confidence, which leads to riskier bets. It is impossible to beat the casino. The one who has the most money always wins, and the concept of game strategy is just a myth. Therefore, it is important to start fighting gambling addiction at the first sign of it. It is quite difficult to cope with the pathological desire to play alone, so it is better to seek help from psychologists. Why are computer games dangerous? Addiction to computer games is a special form of gaming addiction, no less dangerous than other types. Psychologists note that young people who have problems with socialization and avoid communication in real life are more susceptible to this bad habit. Computer games can help solve problems. By completing levels over and over again, the player can feel successful, although in real life this requires a completely different effort. The so-called leveling up of the game character becomes the main goal for which the player sacrifices time and energy. There are role-playing games where players are given the opportunity to not only complete quests and fight monsters, but also interact with each other. These are a kind of virtual worlds where each player plays his role and finds pleasure in it. However, spending hours at the computer, a person sometimes forgets about his real friends and begins to replace them with characters found in the game. This can lead to withdrawal and loss of interest not related to the game. Success in the virtual world can cause emotional upliftment, but it can also deepen depression. Many multiplayer projects offer free play, but for real money, you can purchase artifacts that are not available with in-game currency. Some players are willing to pay significant sums for virtual items, which is typical of internet addiction and pathological addiction to gambling for money. Symptoms of addiction to computer games are similar to those of internet addiction and pathological addiction to gambling. Therefore, it is important to remember that replacing real life with a virtual world will never be a replacement for it, and from time to time it is okay to relax in the game as long as it does not become an addiction. That's right, taking a break occasionally in a game isn't a bad thing as long as it doesn't become a habit or affect your quality of life. It is important to find a balance between the virtual and real world so that the gaming experience complements and does not replace our real existence. Even relaxing in a game can help relieve nervous tension and take a short break from problems, but it is important to remember that you should not make a game a surrogate for real life. Chapter 6. Binge eating. Binge eating, also known as binge eating, can be either a weakness or a psychological addiction. Just a few years ago, the tendency to overeat was not regarded as a psychological addiction and sometimes not just a bad habit. However, doctors have always urged people to eat in moderation without ceasing to warn about health problems that can arise due to obesity. Excess weight is closely associated with many diseases, such as atherosclerosis, cardiovascular disease, hypertension, diabetes, gallstones, and arthritis. Those who are not used to limiting their food intake increase the risk of developing cancer. Reproductive dysfunction due to hormonal imbalance is also common. Excess weight brings significant harm not only to physical but also mental health. We are constantly reminded of this fact on TV screens and the pages of glossy magazines. The discrepancy between reality and the ideal of beauty can lead to constant stress, decreased self-esteem, and the development of complexes. Psychological disorders such as bulimia are often associated with a pathological desire for perfection. Influenced by ideals reminiscent of top models, some girls exhaust themselves with diets without thinking about the possible consequences. Many of them are not nearly as slim as is commonly believed, and are still willing to starve themselves in an attempt to get closer to the image of the ideal. However, failure to eat properly can lead to serious illnesses, including mental health problems. Some unfortunate people suffer from self-denial, even artificially induced vomiting in order to get rid of food. Such practices lead to mental disorders to such an extent that a person becomes unable to objectively assess his appearance. It begins to seem like an ugly fat woman is looking at you from the mirror, although in fact there are no problems with your figure. However, you deliberately refuse to eat and constantly exhaust yourself with physical activity. Those who suffer from bulimia experience self-hatred, suffer from depression, become depressed and overly irritable. Many of those who, although suffering to a lesser extent than those with bulimia, still experience excessive cravings for food, suffer from this addiction much more. Why are we riding on depression? Probably because food becomes a kind of consolation for us, a way to cope with negative emotions and depression. In this sense, food can be our way of absorbing or silencing our sadness. These are very important and useful tips. It is important to remember the difference between real hunger and the psychological desire to snack. If you have a strong urge to snack but don't feel truly hungry, a good place to start is by drinking a small amount of water. This can help reduce thirst and satisfy the body. If this does not help, you can allow yourself a small treat. It is important to control your portion size to avoid overeating. Cut the portion into small pieces and place them on the smallest plate you have at home. This simple trick will help you perceive larger portions, thereby reducing the amount of food you eat and avoiding extra calories. If a food makes you happy, try to find a substitute that is equally enjoyable and healthy. For example, long walks outdoors or exercise can also bring joy and improve health. And most importantly, do not stop loving yourself because of the extra pounds that may have appeared due to painful overeating. With desire and effort, you can get rid of excess weight. It is important to accept yourself for who you are and not go to extremes with dieting or binge eating, which can only worsen your condition. Chapter 7. Shopaholic. Shopaholic, a disease or behavior pattern, is imposed by consumer society. Perhaps you have read the wonderful book, The Power of Confession of a Shopaholic, or watched the Hollywood comedy of the same name. The main character is a sweet, cheerful girl who always looks great. She gets along well with people, and everything would be good in her life if it weren't for her passion for shopping. The closets are full of things that are not even taken out of their packages. Huge credit card debts, the need to hide from bank representatives who want to collect the debt. Nothing can make a girl stop shopping again and again. Of course, in the book, everything ends with a happy ending for the heroine, which cannot be said about people who in real life cannot resist the desire to constantly make purchases. Psychologists argue that the mechanism of the compulsive desire to make purchases is similar to the related mechanism that forces a person to become an alcoholic or drug addict. Getting rid of addiction is sometimes not much easier than getting rid of other habits. We live in a consumer society. Many more different goods are produced than are needed to satisfy human needs. Therefore, advertising encourages us to buy again and again and again, no matter what it is. fashionable dresses, cell phones, or cars. We are indoctrinated with the idea that without new things we will simply fall behind in life and become losers and outsiders. Oniomania is a disease of residents of developed countries. According to researchers, it affects about 20% of the population. It is quite natural that the higher your income, the more temptations there are to spend it on purchasing various goods, including those that you can easily do without. But here we should make a small clarification. If a person becomes a shopaholic, he will buy and buy even if his financial condition leaves much to be desired. If the salary is no longer enough, the shopaholic, without hesitation, will borrow money from friends or take out a loan from a bank, and the need to pay off debts sooner or later may force him to commit a crime. Experts say that the main cause of oniomania is a lack of serotonin. The shopping experience compensates for this by producing short bursts of joy and pleasure. As with other types of addiction, a person begins to need such stimulation more and more often. Other reasons that contribute to the development of shopaholism are childhood psychological trauma, feelings of failure in personal and professional life, sexual problems, and low self-esteem. Like any other psychological problem, oniomania can be accompanied by several diseases. Shopaholics experience decreased immunity, psychosomatic diseases, autonomic dystonia, and arterial hypertension. Those who like to shop are susceptible to depression, their sleep is disturbed, and often the depressed state is replaced by aggressive behavior. How to recognize shopaholics? Women are more susceptible to oniomania, which can be explained by their increased sensitivity to stress and the desire to look fashionable and beautiful. There's nothing wrong with treating yourself to new outfits, jewelry, or cosmetics from time to time. But if the love of shopping begins to prevail over all other hobbies, it's worth thinking about whether you, shopaholics, are sick. The signs that you are becoming a shopaholic are as follows. Any negative experiences force you to go to the store to buy the first thing you come across and experience a short-term surge of happiness. The desire to shop becomes obsessive. Trips to shopping centers take more and more time. In addition, you are placing more and more orders through catalogs and online stores. The inability to make another purchase irritates. Thoughts about shopping become obsessive. You can't think about anything else. After leaving the store, you put your purchases in the closet without even unpacking them. After another unplanned expense, you begin to feel guilty and reproach yourself for your lack of willpower. Technomania is a trap for the stronger sex. After all that has been said above, men can grin smugly and once again feel their superiority over the weaker half of humanity. They certainly won't be so stupid as to devote their lives to shopping. Oh, another trap awaits men. A name that is technomania. All possible gadgets make the life of a modern person much easier, and it would be foolish to advise abandoning them. However, often the desire to keep up with technological progress becomes obsessive, and the acquisition of technical innovations out of necessity becomes an end in itself. The new phone model differs from the previous one in just a couple of functions. You should definitely purchase it. The diagonal of the monitor or TV panel has become a couple of inches larger. A must-buy. And it doesn't matter that this will not have much effect on the image quality. In the new model, the brand has changed the shape of the armrest, and the window lifters have moved a couple of centimeters to the side. Yes, this is a compelling argument in favor of changing your car. Technological innovations appear almost daily. Advertising does not give us the opportunity to miss their release. Owning modern models of phones, tablets, computers, cars today is evidence of success. Men are more concerned about their status and position in society than women. Therefore, the desire to be ahead of everyone extends to technical devices. For those of them who are susceptible to technomania, it begins to seem that only the newest one can be better. The obsessive desire to acquire new equipment is accompanied by the need to demonstrate it, because this is one of the ways of self-affirmation. It doesn't matter to a techie that old technology works properly. He runs shopping as soon as a new model appears. It doesn't matter that in the first 2 to 3 weeks it will cost 20 to 30% more. You can't wait, because by this time everyone else will have already acquired a new product, or something else no less attractive will appear on the market. Technomania causes significant damage to the budget and often becomes the cause of family conflicts. The opportunity to purchase the next new product can cause severe depression, which can only be overcome with medication. How to stop making unnecessary purchases. Before the love of shopping turns into a disease, you have every chance to get rid of this bad habit. This will require very little. First of all, learn to clearly plan your budget. Eliminate the very thought of borrowing unless it is truly vital. Give up credit cards. Do not confuse them with debt, no matter how attractive the bank's conditions may seem. Try to consciously protect yourself from advertising. Watch less TV or change channels every time an advertising block starts. Take out of your pocket and hide away all the discount cards, of which you probably have a whole collection. You can always use them when the need comes to make a truly necessary purchase. On your way home from work, try to choose routes away from your favorite stores. Ignore messages about sales and offers from friends about shopping together. If all of the above doesn't help much, do not hesitate to seek help from psychologists. Modern treatments for neomania are effective enough to help you cope with it, once and for all. Chapter 8. Originally from childhood. Bad upbringing or lack of attention. According to psychologists, many bad habits and obsessive states described above often have their roots in early childhood. Lack of attention from parents, childhood grievances, and psychological trauma can later become the cause of a painful addiction to computer games, tobacco, alcohol, and drugs. But there are also bad habits that are formed at a very early age. Experts tend to divide them into two groups. The first includes those that are truly caused by a lack of attention on the part of parents and a reluctance to devote enough time to raising a child. If a baby is capricious, throws food around, gesticulates excessively on the street, shuffles his feet when walking, or uses the word amazed, most likely he is trying to attract the attention of adults in this way. In such cases, parents need to be explained quite gently but persistently that there are certain standards of behavior. Instill good manners in your child in every possible way. There is no need to scold or punish a child if he scatters toys and refuses to clean them up. It's better to put them in their places with him, turning a boring activity into an interesting game. Recently, parents have been paying very little attention to upbringing, preferring to shift this responsibility to a nanny, kindergarten teacher, or school teacher. It is far from a fact that strangers will patiently explain to your child the rules of behavior in society or try to instill basic rules and tickets. Therefore, do not forget to control your child's behavior and show him by example what to do in certain situations. Another group of bad habits includes those that are more likely to be caused by attention deficit than by poor parenting. Here everything is much more complicated. If a child pulls his ear, nose, or other parts of the body, a neighbor involuntarily sniffs his finger, shakes his legs, tugs, and sways from side to side, be on the lookout. Perhaps he is simply bored, has nothing to do with himself, and lacks your attention. If nothing is done, such actions can soon become obsessive, and it will be much more difficult to correct them. Left to his own devices, the child is forced to console and calm himself. This can cause developmental problems later on. Bad childhood habits can also be caused by the excessive strictness of parents. In this case, they act as a natural psychological defensive reaction. If a child is punished for the slightest offense, constantly hears shouts, and is subject to excessive demands that are inappropriate for his age and level of development, he will most likely acquire a whole bunch of bad habits. Children's habits are the most common misconceptions of parents. The formation of bad habits in a child can occur almost instantly or take several months or even years. In any case, you need to fight them, but a number of misconceptions prevent you from doing this correctly. There is no need to fight habits. They will pass with age. This is fundamentally wrong. Habits won't go away on their own. Rather, they will develop into more harmful ones. Punishment is not an effective method in combating children's habits, quite the opposite. Punishment will further force the child to withdraw into himself and seek reassurance in a new action. Parents should remember that they need to fight the habit, not the child. Punishment must give way to attention. It's better to distract your child than to yell at him. The child should also be encouraged wisely. If every time he listens to you and stops biting his nails or fiddling with his hair, buy him sweets, you only allow him to watch a cartoon. Bad habits can easily turn into a tool of blackmail. Only parents can deal with children's habits. This is partly true. Parental love and attention are effective tools in the fight against bad habits, but sometimes they fail to cope with the necessary organic changes in the nervous system. In such cases, the help of a specialist becomes simply necessary. Often parents are afraid or ashamed to go to doctors, thinking that a visit to a psychologist is a stigma that will remain with the child for life. Firstly, psychologists and neurologists should not be confused with psychiatrists. Secondly, modern diagnostic and treatment methods will help not only quickly cope with new actions, but also get rid of serious problems with mental development. Advice from child psychologists. Even the tiniest person is different from others. The appearance of bad habits in each child has its own specific reasons, individually. However, child psychologists give a number of general recommendations that parents should heed. First of all, try to understand the cause of the baby's anxiety and fears, which led to the development of bad habits. If the child is too small and does not yet speak, carefully observe his behavior. Try to talk to him gently and delicately. Constantly show that you understand the baby and live with his problems. Don't refuse to listen to his complaints. Praise for every new achievement. Do not demand that your child immediately give up bad habits. You yourself will be able to abandon a child that is beyond the power of an adult. The fight against bad habits should be gradual and persistent, but gentle. Otherwise, there is a high probability of developing neuroses and tics. Don't focus your child's attention on bad habits. Don't constantly remind them, despite everything said above. It takes a long time to get rid of bad habits. Do not hesitate to contact specialists. Their timely and qualified assistance will allow you to avoid many even more serious problems in the future.
Dear listener, I hope you enjoyed the book. Write in the comments what other books you would like to hear. Share with your friends and family, and of course, to avoid missing new items. Subscribe to our channel and like it if you haven't already. We wish you all the best and hope that our books will change your life for the better.